So you'll see today we're going to start with a warm welcome. We'll engage in some engaging activities around culturally responsive sustaining education, and then we will have an optimistic closure. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do something I don't know if anybody else has ever asked you to do, but let's pretend like they haven't. I'm going to ask you to turn off your camera for our warm welcome. The reason being, we're going to do an activity titled Turn Your Camera On If. Once you've turned off your camera, you should see, similar to my screenshot on the screen, you should see 3 little dots. Click those 3 dots and select the button that says Hide Non-Video Participants. And I'm going to stop sharing screen for a second. The reason why we want to do that is because if we all do this right, I'm going to say a prompt, and if it applies to you, you're going to pop up on the screen. This is just a way for us to connect with one another through Zoom. It's to see how your colleagues are feeling, what they're thinking. Sound good? Okay. Turn your camera on if you have done at least one home improvement project while staying home during the pandemic. Nice. Nice. So you can see you're not the only one. Okay, turn your cameras off. Great. Okay. Now turn your camera on if you've had an opportunity to connect with someone that you care about over the last month and it really made your day. Nice, nice. Okay, turn your cameras off. Okay, turn your cameras on. If you've had some fun new coworkers, join your Zoom call, like kids or your pets or maybe your partner. Nice, good to know, not the only one. Okay, all right, turn your cameras off. Okay, we're gonna get into some questions that are more tied to the actual content now. So turn your cameras on if you believe culturally destructive curriculum and teaching practices are blatantly obvious. Culturally destructive. Okay. Yeah, this one is a little tricky. I actually, I agree with a lot of folks who don't have their camera on. It's not all the time blatantly obvious, but sometimes it is also. Okay, turn your camera off. Okay, turn your camera on if you agree that it is easier to talk about what culturally responsive education is not than to talk about what it is. Yeah. Yeah, it's like we can identify the things that are that don't feel right, and sometimes it's harder to identify the things that are accurate. Okay, cameras off, cameras off. Turn your camera on if you believe the hands of educators are tied by standards, testing, and required curriculum. Nice. Okay, cameras off, last one. Turn your camera on if you believe cultural responsiveness can be incorporated in all subject areas. Nice to see a lot of folks came on screen. Great. Thank you for engaging in that warm welcome for me, with me. Thanks for indulging me. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now. If someone could come off camera and let me know that they can see my screen and that we're all good.
I see your screen. All good.
Yay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, this is just my offering to you. In order to do that activity, you had to hide non-video participants. You may want to go back and unclick that so you can now show non-video participants. Your choice. Okay, let's get to the meat of why we're here today. So on the screen, you can see a ton of variations of culturally responsive.
That's old. That.
Sorry, thank you. You see a ton of variations that I'm sure you have probably seen and or heard folks use before. The idea here is to think about it in terms of language adapts, right? The more that we learn, the more that we understand what is required from us, we tend to adapt our language. Take that same sentiment here. From this point forward, you're going to hear me refer to this topic as culturally responsive, sustaining education. Culturally responsive, sustaining education. Or if you're Game of Thrones fans like me, I use the abbreviation Cersei, like Cersei from King's Landing.
Oop, Denita, you're muted. I don't know what happened. There you go.
Okay. I don't know. Sorry about that. What did you hear? I'll just repeat. What you're going to hear me refer to this as is culturally responsive, sustaining education, or Cersei. I want to give you a definition of what I mean when I say culturally responsive, sustaining education. Essentially, Cersei takes the key ideas from all of the other variations that I had up on the screen, and it views a multitude of diversity, multiple forms of diversity, like I have written here, race, social class, gender, etc., as assets to education. So it views everything as an asset to education. It combines all of that thinking, takes the sentiment from culturally relevant, culturally responsive, culturally sustaining, and puts it into one. So it views multiple forms of diversity as valid and as assets to education. And then, this is where it takes it to the next step, it views it not only as an asset, but as key to the transformation of both kids' learning and their world around them. So it looks to ask students to both build their skill within themselves and to apply that to critically think about the world around them. Big key words here are liberation and transformation. Liberation from within themselves and in the world around them, and then transformation of their experiences. You could be saying, why? Why does it matter that kids feel liberated within themselves and that they feel empowered to transform the world around them? And it matters because school is just one facet of a kid's entire life, just one. We are a part of a larger system. If you are not familiar with the cycle of oppression, it also has been titled the cycle of socialization. This is nothing new, it's not something that I made up. If you are not familiar with this, I encourage you to do some research. But the key premise here is that every single decision that we make, every single interaction that we have, every single encounter that we have will either replicate this cycle, continue to perpetuate it, or it will disrupt. And if that feels really heavy, it is. For our Black and brown kids, school and what they get from it, what it supports them to be, is a matter of life and death for many of our kids. It's a matter of thriving or a matter of struggling. And so if it feels really big, and particularly I'm going to name this for white educators, if it feels really big, it is. It is our jobs as humans to both care about the experiences of historically marginalized communities, and it is our job to do what we can to make it better. I have to point out that CERFI is not going to be a teaching guide. It's not going to be, I'm not going to give you a checklist of things to do. It is an approach to the craft of teaching. It's an approach that centers liberation and transformation for historically marginalized communities. Why is that important? As the great James Baldwin told us, a child cannot be taught by anyone who despises him. And Dr. Angel Jones took that to the next level and said, nor can a child be taught by anyone who is silent about the world that despises him. So let's just sit in that for a second, take a deep breath. If it feels big, it is. And you're already letting me know by coming here that you care, right? We care about the experiences of our kids. Now our job is to just figure out how we can continuously get better to support the transformation of the current world that we're in. Why is that important? Oops, skip that. Another thing to keep in the back of your brain, oftentimes when we think about culture, we simply think about the surface level. We think about food, we think about language, we think about really visible things to represent culture. And I'm going to give one more caveat, particularly for the white educators here. You may not have thought about culture in any other way than just that. My message here is that culture runs way deeper, way deeper. So if you notice, you have above the line culture and below the line culture. A lot of policies, practices, strategies that we have in place are only geared towards above the line culture. The thing I want you to take away from here is that, one, you can only understand the culture of someone else to the depth that you've been able to understand it within yourself. So if you've never thought about culture being anything deeper other than food, clothes, and language, I encourage you to take some time to think about culture at a deeper level. When you're able to think about it on a deeper level for yourself, then you're able to view it as an asset and appreciate it in others. So those are the two big things I want you to keep in the back of your brain as we move on today. I believe storytelling is a really powerful way to get buy-in. So I'm going to play a video where we get to hear from students, teachers, and parents of the impact of culturally responsive sustaining education. So just take a second and as you're listening, listen for the impact from our teachers, from our students, and particularly from our families. And I hope this sound works. Fingers crossed.
Culturally responsive education for me is the understanding that children are people, and without building relationships and without understanding children, we can't teach them.
When I'm trying to find myself or find my identity, I go towards art and I go towards poetry, but I feel like when I'm in the school system, they always try to define you by your numbers.
It was the first day of biology class, and the teacher, in her southern accent, was just like, all right, I'm just gonna get this off my chest now. I'm not gonna remember any of your names, you know, because all of you got the same hair color and the same eye color.
Growing up, I had a really hard time finding an interest in reading. A lot of the literature that we read talked about topics and experiences.
Oh my God, sorry. I actually don't know what I did. Try again.
Culturally responsive education for me.
I'm gonna get this off my chest now. I'm not gonna remember any of your names, you know, because all of you got the same hair color and the same eye color.
Growing up, I had a really hard time finding an interest in reading. A lot of the literature that we read talked about topics and experiences that were not that relevant to me. The closest we would come to was probably the narratives of immigrants who came from Ellis Island, but even then, there was still some kind of disconnect. I remember noting that these people were welcomed here, whereas my community, they're shunned.
When a few other students and I had approached different history teachers specifically about teaching about LGBTQ culture, either we got the response from teachers that they didn't feel comfortable teaching about LGBTQ history because they didn't identify, or we got the response that they're against teaching LGBTQ history within schools.
When I began teaching, I thought I had to know everything and I had to control everything. I need to assign your seats, tell you when you can get up, lecture to you, write down all of these things, regurgitate it back to me, and if you did that, fantastic. And nothing about your culture was welcomed into the classroom.
Yo he vivido en carne propia, yo he visto y escuchado cómo los maestros hablan de los niños. Cada día dice, llegan los niños y no traen un lápiz, o a veces no traen los cuadernos, y muchos niños llegan con hambre, muchos niños llegan con problemas en el hogar, y yo no tengo tiempo para estar tratando con esos niños.
I had over an hour.
So you got a chance to hear from some students, teachers, parents, and I would love to just hear from at least one person. We have some time for at least one person to share. I've done a lot of talking. What are you thinking about after hearing my thoughts earlier and after hearing from folks in the video? I would love to hear from one person, one brave soul.
I will go. Do you want to actually hear from us or in the chat?
No, I would love to hear from you. Yeah.
My name is Jamila. I think a lot of that was hard to hear, but also really poignant. And the teacher towards the end that was talking about what she thought good teaching was at the beginning, how there was like a template and it was prescriptive, and the control aspect of it really resonated. And I think within our work of garden education, that's kind of the beauty of it, that you can set that aside and really invite student interest and into it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I was talking to Whitney and Kristen, like the beauty of talking to educators who are not in the classroom, as they already come not thinking about restrictions and not thinking about having to control everything. So I really appreciate you naming that. With that said, I want to offer to you 4 components of culture responsive sustaining education. The first one being that we must center and value students' cultures and identity. That feels not that hard, right? Like I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking about that for quite some time. The second one, using rigorous, relevant curriculum and anti-oppressive teaching practices. It takes both, right? We have to make sure our curriculum is both rigorous and relevant, but we can't match that and pair that with teaching practices that are restrictive. The third, building strong, positive relationships, not just with students, but with families in the community. And the fourth, supporting students' development and knowledge and skills and vision to transform the world towards liberation. One of the things that I like to think about, ideally, kids would leave school, they would leave K-12 education, both feeling valid and valuing themselves, feeling like they have their voice, feeling like they know who they are. And they would have their idea of what transformation, what justice, what equity looks like for them. And they would know what their steps are to achieve that. So kids would both feel liberated within themselves and they would know what it takes for them to achieve the world in which they feel like justice and equity and care for others looks like. So it equips kids to be able to meet their own desires and their own goals. With that being said, let's take 1 second and look at an example from a science teacher who was tasked with their district shifted to centering CIRSE, centering culture responsive sustaining education. And we're going to hear this teacher's story of how they was anxious, but it was like an additional thing. It was something else. And we're going to hear from her experience. So listen for ways in which you identify with the teacher. Listen for ways in which you may or may not agree with the teacher. Listen for ways that you disagree.
Changing my mind about what it means to teach and really allowing my students to come up and to teach me, to show their classmates that they know, what they know or even what they don't know, and to be be corrected. That's a practice that I started to implement, that we're all teaching, we're all learning. Something else that it really changed for me was that I don't have to stick to the curriculum. And they asked us to, honor and celebrate Native American History Month. And no matter what we were teaching, do some sort of a lesson, any kind of a lesson, to incorporate something, like go online, look up Native American culture, history, something, and embed it into your practice. And I felt like I was being pushed at first, oh my gosh, they're really pushing me to really think outside the box. But I'm teaching, the rock cycle right now. And how am I going to incorporate this stuff into the rock cycle? No, I don't see it. Maybe something else. Maybe if I was teaching social studies, then I could see how it would be a lot more applicable. And this was early on in the CCER workshops, So at the time, the North Dakota pipeline access, that was going on, and there were protests about that. And there were YouTube videos from students that were the same age as my students that were out basically advocating, and they were activists. And so I did a whole unit on the rock cycle where I incorporated geographically where the North Dakota pipeline access is located, what types of rocks would be along the North Dakota pipeline access. And the students were so into it, they didn't want to move on from that unit. And I started playing videos of students talking about where they live and why their homes and their neighborhoods are important to them and why this is so wrong. And I don't think I would have learned about what was going, it's I'm learning too as a teacher that these things are happening in real time, and my students benefited from that.
I would love to hear some reflections from anyone who's willing to come off camera. There's no perfect answer here. I just would love to hear from you guys. I truly believe that the person doing the talking is the one that's doing the learning. So we'd love to hear from 1 or 2 folks.
I just think it's a really perfect example of how if you really dig deep, you can incorporate this into any subject matter. I taught elementary school, but my husband is a high school English teacher, and he says staff members all the time say, I teach math, so I don't need to think about incorporating Black History Month into math, or it's always I teach this subject, so this doesn't relate to me. And so I think she really summarized that really well and was I'm teaching about the rock cycle, but she just dug deeper and came up with this fantastic unit. And the fact that the students related to it so much, because that's that's the stuff that really engages kids too. So that was awesome.
I echo. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Callan. I really appreciated that she brought up peer teaching and peer mentoring, and to stop. If you don't know, They probably do. So let them speak. And then they'll probably say something that helps you draw that connection. And you don't have to know beforehand. You can let them lead. It's hard to do at first. It feels like a total risk. But then some kids step into that in such an unbelievably successful way.
I just wanted to echo what people have been saying with the way the teacher stepped up to the administrators' demands or pushes was amazing, and she really found an opportunity to get the students engaged. But what first struck me, having been a classroom teacher, is how frustrating it is when culture is kind of like this idea of Native American History Month. Find a way to celebrate it, do an activity. How often culture is kind of just squeezed in, and kind of what you're talking about, Denita, about we're just like looking at the top of the iceberg, like do it, like have some food or throw a festival. And so to me, it was both a very inspirational story at the teacher, but then also like pinpointing what I feel is wrong with a lot of public school systems, is that it's sort of not an authentic expression of culture, or open to all the different cultures in our classroom. So haven't totally formed my thoughts yet, but that's kind of running commentary.
Thank you. And I want to say your name right. Is it Callan? Callan? Oh, perfect. Thank you, Callan, Erica, and Aaron for stepping up and giving me your thoughts. Like, one thing that I see a through line between what you all said is intentionality, right? This teacher. And I really actually love that you pointed out that her task was find a way to incorporate Native American education in whatever you're teaching, right? Like, that is actually a flaw in our system, in our educational institution. And you did something that I tend to like to push people towards, which you noticed it, and then you named it. And then the next thing, or our job, is to disrupt it, right? So in what ways can we disrupt that narrative that we can only talk about cultures within a specific month, or within a specific week for some folks, or within a specific part of the day, right? So you noticed it, named it, and disrupt it. And that's what I encourage all of us to do. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I wanted to just throw out some offerings of what this could look like. This is not an exhaustive list. This also may not be directly tied to what you do, but I just tried to think of ways in which we can incorporate CERSI in many different arenas. So you can look at the effects of capitalism on environment and biological systems. You can examine food apartheid, and thank you, Whitney, for bringing that term to the forefront for me. I had not heard of it. And if you have not heard of a food apartheid, I dropped in the deck, in the notes section, the link to the article that was sent to me, so that you can also learn more. But these are just ways in which I was trying to think about how we could incorporate CERSI into science or culinary arts or garden education. And these are just ways that both liberate kids and help them see the world around them, so that they can create their own idea of what transformation, what justice, what equity looks like for them. These are just my offerings. Again, not an exhaustive list. With that being said, we are actually right on schedule. I wanted to provide you guys with an opportunity to talk to one another. Again, the person doing the talking, I believe, is the person that's doing the learning. So we want to give you an opportunity to do a deep dive into each one of the 4 components of culture responsive sustaining education. We're going to have a total of 8 breakout rooms. 2 of the breakout rooms will focus on one component. So if you're in breakout room 1 or 2, you will focus on centering and values in students' cultures and identities. In the deck, in the link that I dropped for you, if you look on slides 24 through 27, there's actually slides for each one, for each breakout room, with some ideas, with some strategies, with the way that you could practically live this out. This is just my offering to you. You're an adult learner. If you get in your breakout room and you're like, that's actually not the most helpful use of my time right now. I would love to hear about X, or I would love to focus on Y. You guys are adult learners. You know what works best for you. This is just my offering. Some questions that you guys could talk about. What stood out to you? What resonated with you? Resonate simply means gave you an emotion. You either felt some way, you felt positive about something I said, or maybe I said something that made you mad. What resonated? And then if you do get a chance to take a look at the strategies, how can you see them applying in your real life, in your work context? We're going to spend about, I think we have a good amount of time, about 15 to 20 minutes in those breakout rooms. Again, you're going to be in a breakout room, 8 total. I have here on the screen, if you're in 1 or 2, 3 or 4, what you're focusing on. The title of the slides also correspond with that. And with that being said, Whitney, I think it's on you. I think it's on you to put them in breakout rooms.
I'll send folks into breakout rooms. Before I open those breakout rooms, just know there's a button in the breakout room. There should be one that says ask for help. So if anybody gets in the breakout room and is confused about where the slides are, what to do, just hit that button and one of us can come visit you. All right, here we go.
I was always really bad at this as a teacher because I hated to stop really great conversations. But I know that we are on a time crunch, and I would actually love to hear from some of you what you talked about, what resonates with you, what's sticking with you, what stood out.
Yeah, I could just get us started here with an icebreaker. But basically, our group had some really interesting conversation, about the challenges of being able to because we all service teachers. Teachers are our customers, and we do a lot of teacher training in what we do, and just the challenges about when a teacher is how do you actually choose those topics, and how do you make that connection with a group while at the same time not taking out the individual part of it, so not recognizing that everybody is an individual. How do you actually connect with a group without removing the individual? And I thought that was an interesting way to see things.
Thank you, Eddie.
Sure.
What else came up?
Our group was talking about the fact that we sometimes, at Life Lab, for example, we are surrounded by agricultural communities, specifically in South County. And how do we bring those voices of the community, the agricultural community, and to be able to talk about the differences in gardens, for example, that there are small school gardens, there are larger gardens, and then there is like mass production of agriculture all around us. And for the children to be able to connect with that and to say, what are the differences, to be able to name them, and then to be able to say, how do we feel in the different spaces in a school garden? How do we feel, how do our parents feel as agricultural workers? And to be able to just bring the stories from the community and from the children themselves in terms of their own experiences into the work.
I really love to hear that, and I think about how powerful that is for kids to see the connection between their home life, their community life, and school. Thank you. There was someone else that I saw come off camera. Off mute.
Hey, can share a little bit. We were reflecting on some of the challenges and basically that you're building a whole culture around how education happens when you're doing this, and so the limits of time in some of our programs, and being able to kind of lay a baseline of expectations of how you're going to learn as a team, how you're going to communicate, and then having enough time to let students really share and include everybody in the group and hear other stories. It just can be a really challenging thing to do if you, especially this year with kind of inconsistent schedules and maybe you're only with a group of kids for an hour or two once and that's all you get together. So we were sharing some of the ways that we've managed to do that, and also thinking about like the ages of students that we're working with and facilitating conversations being a little bit easier with older students in our experience, but again, kind of even more important with younger students who are being introduced to what it means to be a learner and what it means to be in a community. Yeah, kind of some big thoughts there.
Is it Shay?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to circle back because I actually would love for you to share some of the strategies that you guys have tried when thinking about time restriction, et cetera. I think that we are all experts in our own field, right? And we have things to share with each other. So I would love to hear that. But the sentiment, what I hear from what you're saying is that we have this restriction. We have time that's rigid. We're kind of boxed in, and we're trying to shift the culture to flexibility, to not being linear, to being able to like move with the water, right? And I think you're naming it as a culture shift is exactly right. School, when we think about what it was designed for, was actually not designed for kids to think critically about how to transform the world around them. But that's what we know is best. So how do you make those types of cultural shifts within a system that was actually not designed to have that occur? So that is the big challenge. Definitely, I want to name that. I am not pretending like we don't have those restrictions in front of us, right? I told y'all I identify as a radical. I think we need to like completely redesign school as it is. I don't. So I'm with you, but I would love to actually hear some of the strategies if you have any that you can name off the top of your head.
Anybody I was just chatting with want to jump in? Kristen?
No, I think, Shay, Denita, a lot of my questions were around like how to really foster that collectivist culture. And I agreed with Shay that, if you don't get your students year long, it's really tough. So we're like lucky at Global Gardens that we have sorry, my dog is like apparently needing attention right now, that we have our students for the full year, the same 40 kids. And so, we're really able to work with them to make them feel like they have a voice in the conversation. We're able to like get really smart about how we tailor those conversations. Like tons of examples. I'm not going to get into all of it right now because I think I could talk for 20 minutes. But so I don't know if I have any really good strategies for that little time gap, really. But to say like being really, like you said earlier about intentionality, being really intentional about the conversations and the questions that you ask with kids and your talking strategies, other people from other groups, or Amelia.
I can think of something is like taking a step back as educators ourselves and not rushing into things has been something I've been practicing, and I think what a tool that's been helpful in terms of like building a program is thinking about what sort of pre-activity or pre-resources background that you can share and post-activity that maybe you're not together anymore in a group setting, but you can kind of encourage them to follow up and keep thinking on things and provide a little bit of structure for that. And we've found that really helpful for, we actually just had a teacher who said that was one of their favorite parts of the program, that we offered the kind of the prep and the follow-up, even though we were only together for a short period of time. She as a teacher, was able to take that and kind of fit it into their schedule and continue the conversations with her class.
I wasn't in this group, but I can share a little bit of what we've done at Grow Portland. Denita, is that okay, or do you have a time crunch?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
We also, Shay, have very similar restrictions where we only see kids once a month for about 45 minutes, and it's super challenging. And we're also trying to meet teachers' needs to like prove that we're teaching content and academic connections. And so the social emotional piece or the culturally responsive piece, it's challenging to try and get it all in. But one thing I think that we try to do is always have stations and choices so that, and they're very different kinds of choices that the kids can engage with. So, you know, kids are going to want to do lots of different things and have different activities that are going to tap into the kids that need to wiggle, the kids that really want to share verbally, the kids that like to get dirty and the kids that don't, or the artistic, creative kids, or the ones that need some quiet mindfulness time, and trying to set those up and really let them choose, which sometimes I think is hard for teachers even that don't, you know, they want to tell you, okay, 8 of you are going here and 8 of you are going there, rather than taking the time to say, where do you want to go? What's interesting to you? And the other piece I think for our educators is always having a lesson plan, and then always being willing to say, I was going to teach about rain, and now everyone is really interested about ladybugs, and we're going to follow their interests and go down that road. And also really having it be open, you know, like the teachers in the video were saying, of letting the kids step up if they're inspired and they be the teacher and set them up for success. So.
I think there's something to be said, though, for pushing back on the schools a little bit and saying what the structure of the organization is, that and how the school can partner with us without trying to fit so tightly in the school schedule. We're not coming from the partnership as a place of deficit, but as a place of resource. So I always thought, whenever partnering with schools, yes, what can we provide during school times, but what happens afterwards? How is the garden available during other times? Like all that kind of thing, instead of knowing that it's a broken system of, or there's aspects that are broken that we keep trying to fit into. I'm not saying don't do that, but I think then thinking beyond that is what helps us kind of push in a certain direction. And I found that helpful when we came to the conversation with that in mind, when establishing relationships.
God, this is why I love having opportunity for this type of conversation, because what you said, Rebecca, is exactly what I was thinking. Being outside of the system is a weird way to phrase it, but being outside of the public school system, you're in such a unique position to push for what we actually know is best. It's not sustainable to move at the rate in which education moves right now. It's not actually what's best for kids. And so what are the ways in which you can model best practices? And what are the ways that you can push mindset and push thinking? Remembering that we are part of a cycle, right? Where every action, no matter how big or small, either disrupts or perpetuates the cycle. So what are the ways in which we can use our own relational power to push on the systems and practices that are not best practices for kids, right? So, I mean, it's not even best practices for anybody to move like this. On the days where I am on Zoom from 8:30 to 6 at night, I am not my best self. I am not my best self. And by the end, my face is probably reading that I am annoyed by being here. Like I am not leaning into my highest being. So what are the ways in which we can push against these systems, these oppressive practices from our seat? Like we know that we don't have the power to change the entire system, but we do have relational power to influence. So how can we influence as much as we can? How about one or two more folks, and then we will go into our optimistic closure, and I will be out of your hair for the day.
I have a really quick way that I try to get culture a spot on the stage in these tight classes. When we're doing a tasting at the end, before we eat, I ask for kids to volunteer what they say at their house before they eat. Just not a long prayer or whatever, but like, what's a few words that you might say? So some kids will say, "A tu salud," and we'll use that before we eat. And each week, kids get a little braver, and a few more folks decide, like, yeah, I'll say that, and it's so fun.
One thing. Oh, go ahead.
We'll go Rebecca, because I saw her come off camera first. I'm sorry, I don't know if you use she, her pronouns, but I saw Rebecca come off first, and then we'll go George.
I was just going to throw in, which I think is somewhat been said, but just we try to start off our time outside with asking the students what they know. And I think we have that advantage of not being the classroom teacher, and that they're excited to share with someone new, and it gives them a chance to share. And there's always students that are more open verbally than other students, but throughout the time together, we try to find ways for everybody to be involved or to share, even if it's maybe not verbally answering a question, but starting off with asking them what they know and asking them questions instead of launching into our explanation, I think helps even when you have a short amount of time together.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I was just going to add something that you said, Shay, that made me think of a challenge that our organization has faced recently around integrating CRT into our lessons and really providing educators with like training and confidence, is like when their schools seem to be like not ready for it. And I'm just, yeah, in this conversation, I'm like feeling empowered to like, I guess, yeah, like call schools into that and like really make this garden space like a place for teacher learning as well. And so making sure that we're not, yeah, like suppressing teachers with content that they might not be prepared to continue the conversations for in their classrooms, and like really making sure that we're being proactive in communication with teachers and like being like, here's my unit plan, like these are the phenomenon I'm going to be covering, and here are like the environmental justice topics I'm going to be talking about, and not like compromising on that, and then kind of inviting them in that way. So just appreciating this.
I am feeling incredibly grateful to be in this conversation with you all. I want to just highlight a couple of things. George, what you said made me think about the importance of relationships and the importance of partnership between humans, right? Like, we are trying to be better humans for humans, and then the teaching stuff comes after, right? So it made me think about the importance of being in relationship, something that I hold in the back of my brain at the same time of being like a radical, is that change isn't going to happen through shame. And so if we're shaming systems, or if we're shaming the people who are busting their asses, please pardon my language, we're not actually going to achieve the change that we want to achieve. So relationships feel really important here. I'm going to echo one more time the relational power, right? Like, how can we use those relationships to influence change, to influence difference? And then lastly, I just want to name this for y'all. Being in this type of work where you're constantly pushing back against the status quo could feel exhausting. I tend to feel exhausted often, particularly for BIPOC folks, so people who identify as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American. Like, it is exhausting to consistently both push back against the system and fight for your humanity, right? So be sure that you are also taking care of yourself. Lean on the fact that you are in a room right now with 24 other people who are also working really hard to transform the system. It is not, and it cannot fall on just our shoulders alone. We have to be in partnership with each other. So with that being said, if you remember, I said at the beginning of this, your journey to being culturally responsive human educator is only as deep as you make it. It's only going to go as far as you invest. So my deck for you is just an offering for you to circle back as often as you wish. There are links in many of the pages, many of the deck pages that have alternate resources. There's books for you to read. Oh, I should probably share this page. Here we go. Oh no, you can't see. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, so there's this page, and then in the notes section, there are a ton of resources. Find solace in the fact that you are not the only one that's thinking about this, right? We are working as a collective, and it's going to take all of us. With that being said, we're at our optimistic closure. What I would love to see is with someone you can either use the chat or you can come off mute. And what is a word or phrase that comes up for you when you're thinking about thirsty, when you're thinking about culture responsive sustaining education? So you can either use the chat or you can come off mute and say a one word or phrase. Okay, got the chat open. Communication, connection, resistance, yes, listening, respect, connection, belonging, love, hopeful, community, essential, authenticity, yep. How we do what we do, yeah, great. Intentionality, thank you guys for leaning in there. Thank you for being so present in this conversation with me today. Thank you for letting me come and present some offerings to you. And my email is in the beginning of the deck. So if you have, I don't know, questions, anything you want to know further, feel free to reach out. Sometimes I really suck at responding to emails, I'm gonna be honest, but I do respond, but it may be more than 24 hours. So just naming that for you. Thank you guys very much.
I don't like the quiet at the end of a Zoom call. This was so incredible. Let's all unmute, and you won't really hear everyone, but I don't care. Everyone, let's unmute and thank Denita. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Denita.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
So awesome. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for all of these offerings. This is incredible.
Thank you guys so much. It was so great to sit here and be in conversation with you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Folks in Working Group B, we have an optional hangout at 12:30, and then we'll start back at 12:45 Pacific time. So see you then. And everyone else, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
I think Benny heard you the whole time and just kept popping in.
I saw Benny. I was like, oh, so cute.
I was like,
I feel like Benny learned something.
I was like, oh, I'll just talk right now. And then of course, maybe Whitney, maybe you stop recording while I express my, and then I was like, oh, good, Benny, you can come.
Oh, I'm going to stop recording now.
Immediately in my thought and break my total